I have been married to Irma Gardner for 6 years. She was once a distinguished lady, but she unexpectedly fell into decline. I stayed by her side unwaveringly. Finally, her new work Muse became famous, and the genius artist returned to her peak. A reporter asked her, "Who is the man in the painting?" She smiled gently, "He is the love of my life." That day, I received her divorce agreement. Ding! Storyshots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. Genius artist Irma Gardner returns with her new work Muse, reclaiming her former glory years later. At the art exhibition, all her works were sold at high prices, except the most eye-catching Muse. It was a vivid oil painting. Under the soft moonlight, the lake sparkled, and a young man in white stood against the wind, holding flowers and smiling enchanting. She said, "This is not for sale, not for any amount of money." A reporter asked her, "Who is the man in the painting?" She smiled gently, "He is the love of my life." That day, I received the divorce agreement Irma mailed to me. The money and house were all mine, and she left with nothing. I saw a live stream online and called her, "Congratulations, the exhibition was very successful." Her tone was indifferent, "It has nothing to do with you." "How come?" I raised my voice, questioning, "Aren't you leaving with nothing? The income from the exhibition is also marital property, we should calculate it." She snorted coldly, "Hervey Miles, you really have money on your mind." I sneered, "Money is more reliable than people." She was silent for a moment. "I'll have the lawyer send you a new agreement tomorrow." I readily agreed, "Fine, let's cut all ties. Let's both." Before she finished speaking, I hung up the phone, as if listening for another second was a waste. It's hard to imagine that 4 months ago today, I was still praying to spend a lifetime with her, hand in hand till old age. That day was our 6th wedding anniversary, Valentine's Day. I quietly flew back from France to surprise Irma Gardner. When I got to the apartment building, I saw a young man carrying luggage, standing alone in the snow. His hands were red from the cold, but he was happily talking on the phone. "Guess where I am?" I didn't hear the other side, but the young man's face relaxed, and he said warmly, "I missed you, so I came to see you." I recalled the time during college when Irma and I had a long-distance relationship. In the depths of longing, we would also buy a ticket without hesitation to see each other. Moved by the scene, I took out my phone to call Irma. The next moment, I saw her coming out of the corridor. She ran straight to the young man, threw herself into his arms. He tightly embraced her, as if holding a rare treasure. In the silent snowy night, they kissed passionately and for a long time. I stood there stiffly, watching their surging love. When Irma lifted her eyes, she finally noticed me standing not far away. I struggled forward with my luggage, a few steps felt like spanning mountains and seas. Her first reaction was to stand protectively in front of him. The young man seemed puzzled and bent down to whisper in her ear, "Who is he?" For a moment, I didn't know what expression to make. Standing before them, I said flatly, "I'm her husband." Upon hearing this, the boy stepped forward, trying to shield Irma. "This is my fault, don't blame her." I laughed silently, looking at the woman behind him with a conflicted expression. "Aren't you going to say something?" Irma pressed her lips together, her gaze darkening, as if she had made some decision. She walked up to stand shoulder to shoulder with the boy, holding his hand tightly, and said to me, "It's just as you see. The snowstorm might have been too heavy, my mind was numb from the cold." No questioning, no quarrel, I quietly turned and went home. Irma didn't follow me. The windows on the balcony were wide open, the cold wind whooshing in. I could even imagine the look of surprise and joy on Irma's face when she received the call. Opened the window, and saw the young man standing gracefully below. The easel beside me was still set up, the unfinished work jumped into view. Its protagonist clearly the young man from earlier. He held roses, his clothes fluttering in the wind, his face shy with the joy of seeing his lover. Once, Irma also painted me with such dedication. I met her when we were 16 in high school. She was very popular at that time, a rich girl, a straight-A student. The school belle, all kinds of auras gathered around her. I came from the countryside, worlds apart. And we wouldn't have intersected if we hadn't become deskmates. I wasn't good at studying and had a slight accent, often ridiculed by classmates. She defended me and patiently taught me. The girl's words were always accompanied by a smile. Her slight smile bright as 1,000 blossoming trees. I secretly loved her for 3 years, never daring to hope that she liked me too. After college entrance exams, she chose an art academy. She said painting was her lifelong dream, and her family supported her. She could afford to be willful, but I couldn't. With my grades at that time, my best option was to go to a school in the South, 1,000 miles away from her. That summer holiday, she came to my little mountain village for sketching and asked me to be her guide. Translation. We looked at the flowers on the hillside, the birds in the forest, the clouds in the sky together. On the last day, my mother brought out our homemade plum wine and offered it to her. I didn't stop her. She drank a glass and became so drunk that she couldn't tell north from south. She collapsed into my arms, her face flushed, babbling drunkenly. She said, "Hervey, I like you." I helped her pack her things and discovered that all her paintings were of me. When she left, I saw her off to the station. We walked very slowly, and I really wanted to ask her, "Do the things you said last night still count?" I couldn't hold it in any longer and finally spoke. "Irma Gardner, would it be too late if I confess now?" She looked at me, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "It's not too late. As long as it's you, it's never too late." We got together. During our 4 years of long-distance relationship in college, I gave her all the love and security she needed, making sure she knew clearly that she was the one being favored. She often laughed at me without restraint. "Hervey, you love me so much." I let her tease me, and when she had her fill, I'd lean down and gently kiss her. From 18 to 28, we loved each other for 10 years. Countless memories roared through my mind. The repressed emotions finally exploded, and I tore the painting to shreds in despair. I sat alone on the sofa until dawn. When Irma Gardner returned, she carried a strange scent, like the smell of hotel body wash. When she saw me, there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. "Sorry." My eyes were red, and my voice was hoarse when I spoke. "When did it start?" She candidly recounted their past. The boy was called Larry Smith, a senior student at the Academy of Fine Arts, also studying painting. They met last year when she returned to her alma mater for the school celebration. He admired Irma Gardner's talent and was her devoted and passionate admirer. Their souls connected. They often reflected on Van Gogh under the stars and chatted about Monet's water lilies by the lakeside. She said they were rare confidants and truly in love. Our 10 years together couldn't compare to their 10 months of acquaintance. When Irma Gardner spoke of him, her eyes were tender, her expression gentle. She emphasized many times, "I really love him." I was insanely jealous. "He's just a college student, disrupting someone else's marriage. What kind of good person can he be? Isn't it just for money?" Irma Gardner looked at me, her gaze gradually becoming cold. "Hervey, he isn't like you, only seeing money." Her words deeply wounded me. Irma Gardner was a natural romantic, always treating money like dirt. Even in college, she was already a somewhat famous painter. Many people had once offered big money to buy her paintings, but she always refused. Her paintings were only gifted to those she deemed worthy. But life is unpredictable. The year she graduated, her family went bankrupt. Her parents were chased by creditors and died in a car accident. She was trapped at home by the creditors. I secretly climbed over the wall to find her and hugged her, saying, "Irma Gardner, marry me." I had no status, no fortune, but I had a heart of unwavering sincerity. I consulted a lawyer, who confirmed that the parents' debts were not the children's responsibility. But there were too many creditors, and their endless harassment could ruin Irma Gardner's life. With my mother's consent, I took out all our savings, raised some money, and negotiated to help Irma Gardner settle her debts with the least cost. After marriage, our days were tough. The rented house leaked wind and rain. During typhoon days, our home turned into a small pond. In winter, the wind blew through the house, making it impossible to sleep. We held each other tightly, talking through the night. Irma Gardner tried to find those who once wanted to buy her paintings but only faced humiliation. She had been too proud and offended people. Now, needing money, she faced obstacles everywhere. I felt heartbroken and stopped her from selling her paintings. To make her life more comfortable, I worked 3 jobs a day. If I earned $100, I would spend 99 on her. Once, I was anemic and temporarily lost my sight for a few minutes. She clumsily took care of me, her voice shaking as she called my name. She cried uncontrollably in front of me. "Not marrying you would have been a lifelong regret. But marrying you and burdening you makes me feel even more despair." I scolded her, "Fool, I never thought of you as a burden." At that time, I felt very happy. "Let's get a divorce." Irma Gardner's words pulled me back to reality. She was very determined, saying, "I will agree to anything you ask for." My heart clenched. Isn't it clear what I want? She didn't understand and just asked, "You set the conditions." I burst out laughing. "You really would give up everything for him?" Irma Gardner lowered her eyes and dropped a bombshell. "Hervey, I'm pregnant with his child." My heart shattered into pieces. I remembered, we once had a child. In our second year of marriage, Irma Gardner got pregnant. I was overjoyed. But she secretly had an abortion without telling me. Tears streaming down her face, she told me, "Hervey, we can't afford to raise a child with our current conditions. Let's not bring him into this world to suffer." Irma Gardner apologized to me countless times. I hugged her, forcing a smile, and comforted her, "It's okay, we can have children in the future." That day, she held me tightly, repeatedly whispering in my ear, "I love you." Those words felt like a spell, binding our hearts together during days when we had nothing. After that, I worked even harder. I was good at reading people and situations, gradually making a name for myself in the workplace. The boss was in the import-export business, and he often needed to entertain clients. I could hold my liquor well, so he liked taking me along and would give me extra bonuses. Every day, I would come home and vomit until the room spun. And Irma Gardner would stay by my side all night, carefully taking care of me. She always said, "Don't ruin your health for just some pocket change." I shrugged it off. "You have to think long term." Over time, I built up quite a network, and eventually, I started my own wine business. I traveled, attended social events, and was extremely busy. Irma Gardner would say, "We have enough money, you don't need to push yourself so hard." But I had two wishes I was determined to fulfill. I always believed that Irma's future would be bright and boundless. And I hoped she could paint freely without having to give up her lifelong passion for art due to life's trivialities. I also wished that the child we had to give up would return to us soon. Heaven doesn't disappoint those who work hard. Our lives genuinely started to improve bit by bit. In our 5th year of marriage, we had a house and savings. I finally mustered the courage to suggest, "Honey, let's have a child." To my surprise, she wasn't very enthusiastic and simply said, "Hervey Miles, now isn't the right time." She told me that she was going through a creative block and hadn't painted anything she was satisfied with in a long time. I tried to comfort her, "Your paintings are fantastic. My friends love them, and Mr. Zantop even wants to buy one for his new home next month." Irma Gardner scoffed, "What do those Philistines know about art?" I was taken aback, realizing she'd misspoken. She immediately apologized and explained that she didn't look down on businesspeople. She just wanted recognition from more professional eyes. She buried her head in my shoulder and whispered, "I'm just losing confidence." Maybe by then, there was already a crack in our relationship. But I was too busy to notice the changes in her. Soon after, Irma's mood started to improve, and she often had a smile on her face. I thought she had broken through her creative block. But it turned out she had found a new emotional anchor. The young man she loved was in the prime of his youth, untouched by the ravages of time. He would describe her paintings as the flowers of spring, the rains of summer, the winds of autumn, and the snow of winter, the most beautiful things in the world. But I, as a businessman chasing profits, was filled with worldly concerns, unable to resonate with her. "Hervey Miles, I've wronged you," Irma's voice echoed in my ear. I remained silent for a long time, like the time we had spent together. In the end, I was still unwilling to let go. "I won't divorce you," I heard myself say. Irma coldly replied, "That isn't for you to decide." At that moment, I heard the sound of our love dying. When Irma and I were at our worst, my mom fell ill and was hospitalized. The doctor said it was late-stage cancer. My dad passed away early, and my mom had suffered all her life. When I got married, she insisted on living alone in the countryside so as not to burden us. Later, when our financial situation improved a bit, I still didn't have time to be with her. I felt deep guilt, never having let her enjoy a single day of happiness. Lying on the hospital bed, frail and withered, she asked me, "Where's Irma?" Forcing a smile, I cheerfully replied, "She's busy preparing for an art exhibition." I told my mom that Irma had gained the recognition of the great art master Ian Johnson and was about to make a name for herself. Mom smiled contentedly. Irma finally achieved her dream. "Your future will definitely get better, I can rest easy." I made up an excuse to leave the room, unable to stop the tears from flowing. Fate really loved to play tricks on me. Shortly after our argument, Irma received news from France that the reclusive Mr. Johnson had suddenly taken an interest in her paintings and wanted to meet her. Finally recognizing her talent, they hit it off, lamenting how they hadn't met sooner. Irma regarded that young man as her lucky star. She said it was he who helped her rediscover her love for painting, which led to this opportunity. She would never know that it was me who had painstakingly created this chance for her. And now, it felt like it was all for someone else's benefit. I washed my face and returned to the hospital room. My mom suddenly said she wanted to see Irma. Unable to refuse, I finally reached out to her. Maybe it was my pride. I didn't want to appear weak in front of her, so I opened with a negotiation. Irma, let's make a deal. I'll agree to the divorce if you play along with me for this one thing. Okay. She agreed without hesitation. Even though it was exactly what I wanted, my heart twisted in pain. Disappointment, anger, sadness and negative emotions gnawed at me like thousands of venomous insects. I thought I was going mad. Irma arrived on time. Half a month since I last saw her, she has become even more graceful and dazzling. She must be doing well. We both composed ourselves, pretending to be close, and pushed open the door to enter the hospital room. My mother lay weakly on the hospital bed. Upon seeing us, her cloudy eyes suddenly brightened, and she forced herself to sit up and speak with us. She urged me to love my wife and not to wrong her. Then, she advised Irma Gardner to live well with me. My mother wasn't talkative before, but this time, it seemed she had endless things to say. I knew that she was just worried about us. Irma responded to her advice one by one. Okay. Finally, my mother placed our hands together and instructed, take care of each other in this life. I couldn't help but tear up. In truth, I wanted to tell her that if she passed away, I would have no family left in this world. But now, the words were stuck in my throat, and I couldn't say anything. Irma naturally patted my back, her gentle eyes reminding me of the 18-year-old girl she once was. I felt a bit lost. After leaving the hospital room, we were still holding hands. I shamefully realized that I was still clinging to the warmth of her palm. Can we not get a divorce? Such a ridiculous thought hovered in my mind. Suddenly, the phone rang, and Irma let go of my hand. I looked up at her in confusion, and the shadow of the girl vanished in an instant. She walked aside to answer the call, and I could hear snippets of her mundane conversation. Whatever the person on the other end said made her blush and scold, shameless. Then, in a sweet voice, she said, I'll be home soon. I looked at this woman and suddenly found her extremely unfamiliar. After the call, she noticed my lost expression and frowned. You don't look well, are you sick? As she spoke, she reached out to touch my forehead, but I reflexively dodged. We both froze. Her hand paused midair, and she awkwardly said, we can delay the divorce until your mother gets better. My sinking consciousness finally cleared, and I nodded in agreement. My mother's condition didn't improve, and her memory deteriorated. Every now and then, she would say she wanted to see Irma Gardner. Irma played along with me for 3 months, listening to my mother's repeated advice. Every time Irma came to the hospital, Larry Smith would call frequently. And later, he ended up coming along. The day they showed up holding hands, I got very angry, blocking their way. Tell him to get lost. Irma explained that he would wait nearby and not let my mother see him. I refused to compromise, mocking, a bit less public affection won't kill you. The usually silent boy suddenly stepped forward, angrily. You're going too far. You two are getting a divorce, so stop making things difficult. He got more agitated, almost engaging in a fight with me. She's been so busy preparing for the art exhibition that she can't even eat. I came because I was worried. Irma held his hand, gently soothing him. Don't get upset, you'll scare our child. Larry glared at me and looked down at her. But I feel sorry for you. Their affectionate display made my stomach churn. I sneered. Irma and I are still married. What you're doing is considered infidelity. Or are you just renting her, paying for her company? Irma froze, her eyes welling up. Hervey Miles, have you gone mad? Larry gritted his teeth and glared at me. A grown man speaking so viciously, no wonder your wife doesn't appreciate you. I'm done holding back. Today, she either leaves with me or stays with you, she has to choose one. Then, he turned to look at the woman beside him, his eyes earnest. There was no suspense. Irma Gardner left hand in hand with her lover. That day, my mother was actually in good spirits. I lied and said Irma had an urgent matter, and she didn't question it. But by evening, my mother suddenly fell into a coma. and the doctor issued a critical condition notice. When she regained consciousness, she said she wanted to see Irma Gardner again. Panicking, I called her, and it took a long time for her to answer. I squatted on the ground, holding my head, and asked, "Can you come over?" She replied bluntly, "It's too late." I urged, "My mother is nearing the end." She spoke impatiently, "I suggest you stop making such jokes." Shocked and angry, I said, "Do you think I would joke about my mother's life?" She was silent for a moment and then said, "It's raining tonight, and I'm pregnant. He won't let me go out." I disregarded my pride, nearly begging. "Ask him to bring you over. Or I can have a friend drive over to pick you up and ensure your safety, okay? We've had 10 years together, please help me this one last time." She sighed, "I'll discuss it with him." I clung to a sliver of hope, incoherently saying, "I'll take the blame for today's fight, okay? As long as you come over tonight, I'll agree to whatever you want, okay?" Thunder rumbled, burying the sound of my shattered pride in the night. On the other end of the line, I heard a low, husky voice, faintly tinged with desire. Irma Gardner let out an unnatural groan, lightly chiding, "Stop it." The phone call ended abruptly, and every time I tried to call back, there was no answer. That day, she never showed up, even until late at night. My mom noticed something was off and cautiously asked, "Did you and Irma have a fight?" I tried to act casual, "No, she's on her way." My mom's frown deepened. And she insisted I call her again so she could say a few words to Irma Gardner. But her phone was off. Later, as my mom's consciousness began to fade, she murmured, "Son, if you're not doing well, how will I ever rest in peace?" At dawn, she passed away, holding my hand tightly, refusing to close her eyes. My world crumbled into ruins. I took my mom's ashes back to the countryside for burial. Irma Gardner came along. She hung her head, her face full of guilt. "I'm sorry, I didn't know about your mom that night." I ushered her out, weakly saying, "Don't call her mom, you don't deserve it." "Hervey, can't you talk to me properly?" Irma's voice softened, "I just wanted to see if there was anything I could help with." I kept a cold face, "No need." She refused to leave and stayed by my side. The funeral was simple, with just a few neighbors helping out. After everything was over and the people had left, I finally calmed down and said to Irma, "Let's talk." She nodded and agreed. I spoke coldly, "Let's get the divorce papers sorted out quickly." She frowned and changed the topic. "I want to explain what happened that night." "I don't want to hear it." I interrupted her and continued, "You are the one at fault. I want you to leave with nothing. I know exactly what assets we have, don't play tricks. And don't try to negotiate, or I'll make your disgrace known to everyone." Irma looked at me sadly. "Hervey, the assets were earned by you. Do you think I would compete with you for them?" I sneered, "You never truly know a person." She looked disappointed, "You didn't used to be like this." "People change," I replied. "The Irma Gardner I once knew would never have treated me like this." A long silence was interrupted by the ringing phone. It was a call from Larry Smith. She stepped outside to answer it. I closed the door behind her, and she didn't come back. That night, I lay on the bed in my old house and had a long dream. I dreamt of my 22-year-old self, bringing Irma Gardner home against all odds. Telling my mom I wanted to marry her. Creditors came to my house, causing a ruckus every day. My mom hid her in a room, instructing, "Irma, don't go out, let Hervey handle everything." I negotiated with the creditors alone for months until I finally settled things before the new year. On New Year's Eve, it snowed. I returned, exhausted, from out of town. Snowflakes accumulated on me layer by layer. But I didn't feel cold. The moment I got home, she was the first to open the door, rushing out and throwing herself into my arms. I staggered slightly but held her tightly. "I never want to be apart from you again." Irma Gardner's laughter and tears made her adorable. Just as I was about to respond, the scene spun. I stood there in a daze, watching her run into someone else's arms in the snow, passionately kissing him. "Irma Gardner! Irma Gardner!" I kept calling her name, but she couldn't hear me. Suddenly, everything went black. I felt a strong sense of weightlessness, like falling into an abyss. The next day, I woke up with a high fever, my mind muddled. I lay at home for 2 days, feeling near death. One day, I received a message from a business partner. The wine supply had an issue, causing a significant loss. I shot up, quickly got dressed, and left the house. I saw the doctor alone, took medicine, and recovered. Those 4 months drained me of my energy. And I made many mistakes in business, leaving me no time to grieve. The next time I heard Irma Gardner's name was news of her making a big name at an art exhibition. The always demanding art master, Mr. Ian Johnson, highly praised her, saying she had been a hidden gem for years. The reclusive elder even made a public appearance at the exhibition, declaring that Irma Gardner is the most talented young female painter he has ever seen in his life. The art world was shaken. The media caught on, and reports flooded the internet. She was already strikingly beautiful, and her added charm boosted her popularity beyond that of celebrity influencers. The hashtag goddess painter Irma Gardner hashtag topped the trending list. All her works sold out. And someone even offered $10 million for the most notable piece in the exhibition. Muse. Irma Gardner declined. Sensing a scoop, reporters asked who the man in her painting was. She openly expressed her feelings. A college roommate forwarded the video to me, asking, "How could Irma Gardner say that?" Clutching the just-received divorce papers, I replied, "It's nothing. She's fallen for someone else, and we're getting a divorce." My roommate called me directly, angrily saying, "Wasn't everything fine 4 months ago? Doesn't she know how much you suffered in France for her?" I responded calmly, knowing won't change anything. On our 6th wedding anniversary, I wanted to prepare a special gift for Irma Gardner. I knew the person she admired the most was a painter named Ian Johnson. This gentleman had rarely appeared in public when he was younger and now lived a reclusive life, making him hard to find. I used every method and connection I had to obtain a lead, though its authenticity was questionable. Someone had seen him browsing street art stalls in the Marais district of Paris. So, using a business trip as an excuse, I went to France alone. It was my first time abroad, unfamiliar with the place, and my luggage was stolen on the first day. In my haste to give chase, I was led into a secluded alley. There, I was surrounded by a gang of street thugs and beaten up. Before losing consciousness, I heard someone shout something in French, and all the thugs ran off in a hurry. When I woke up in the hospital, I found that I only had some superficial injuries. It was Flint Lloyd who had saved me. We were college roommates, and after I got married, he went abroad, gradually losing contact. I never expected to reunite under such circumstances. He helped me a lot and took care of me during my recovery. He asked, "Aren't you going to tell Irma Gardner?" I shook my head. During that period, Irma often locked herself in her art studio, seemingly at a critical phase. I didn't want her to worry. As soon as I felt a bit better, I rushed out every day to keep watch at the Marais district. Actually, I didn't have much hope of finding Mr. Johnson. But I didn't want to give up any possibility. When Flint found out my purpose for the trip, he looked at me with eyes wide open and an expression as if I were an idiot. Then, he exaggeratedly mocked me. "You keep spoiling her and she'll become spoiled rotten one day." I glared at him. "I don't mind." We tussled playfully, reminiscent of our college days. I made a deal with a street vendor in the Marais district to rent his art stall and displayed several of Irma's works from different periods in the most prominent spot, praying for Lady Luck to smile on me every day. It was winter, and when I wasn't sleeping, I was out in the cold, frost-bitten wind until my ears got sores. Flint would always buy me medicine while complaining, "You're asking for this." After spending 3 weeks in France, with Valentine's Day approaching, I planned to return home. This impromptu trip abroad was indeed too impulsive. And it was understandable that I couldn't find anyone. I thought of acting again only when I had more concrete information. Then, the unexpected happened quietly. On the last day, as I was about to pack up, Mr. Johnson appeared and immediately took a liking to a piece Irma had created at 18. He smiled and asked me who the artist was, and I proudly said Irma Gardner's name. He pointed to the "Not for Sale" tag next to the painting and asked, "Not for sale?" I nodded. "It's part of my personal collection." "Then why display it?" I said, "I hope more people can see this amazing artist." He pondered for a while, looking at the painting for a long time before leaving with a smile. I knew about his reputation for cherishing talent, having discovered many unknown small-time artists who have now become industry icons. I knew Irma's opportunity had come. Things went smoother than I had expected. I thought, talented people are destined to rise above. I was genuinely happy for Irma. She was one step closer to her dream. On our wedding anniversary, I lied to Irma, saying I couldn't return from France, wanting to give her a surprise. But she reacted very indifferently, only saying, "Got it." At first, I felt a bit sad, but when boarding the plane, I saw she had posted in her moments, "Missing you across mountains and seas." The gloom in my heart instantly dissipated, and on the return trip, I was still fantasizing about our beautiful future. What a joke, her affection had long shifted to someone else. "Don't you feel resentful?" Flint asked me. I responded calmly, "Of course I do, but what's more important now is to live my life well." He sighed with relief, "Hervey Miles, sometimes your rationality is scary." I laughed, "Thanks for the compliment." After hanging up, the surroundings quieted down. I opened that video again. In the camera, Irma smiled gently and affectionately, saying that boy was her true love for life. Indeed, it was uncomfortable. I called Irma and told her the income from the art exhibition should be considered premarital property. And if we divorced, it would belong to me. She mocked me but agreed. She was indeed eager to marry her lover. I tried to consider the trip to France as an investment. And now that I had received a large fortune, it wasn't a total loss. Thinking this way, I gradually reconciled with myself. Money is indeed a good thing. That night, I opened the finest wine for myself and drank deep into the night. The next morning, I was awakened by a call. Flint's voice sounded distant. "Open the door." I stumbled out, opened the door, and saw him carrying luggage with a grim face. "Such a big thing happened, and you didn't even tell me." "Some friend you are." I was stunned. He opened his arms and smiled at me. "Buddy, I'm here to keep you company." I hugged him, touched. "You really are a good brother." But it turned out I was too soon to be touched. To a man contemplating divorce, a friend in the throes of new love is a poison. That night, as I waited for him to join a gaming session, he lingered, unwilling to end the video call with his girlfriend. I grabbed him by the neck angrily. "Isn't showing off your romantic life in front of me a bit too much?" He shamelessly grinned. "I'm just fighting poison with poison." Honestly, I admired him. Despite having been hurt so deeply before, he could still live so freely. "Do you regret ever loving Nadia Evans?" I regretted asking as soon as the words left my mouth. Hearing the name, Flint Lloyd didn't show much emotion and only said, "A relationship isn't necessarily a tragedy if it doesn't end well." I pondered over his words seriously. I thought, there's no need to resent the 18-year-old her because of the 28-year-old Irma Gardner. The girl who once amazed time is just gone now. I will accept this and gradually let go. A month later, Irma Gardner and I got our divorce certificate. I bought a vineyard in Montmartre, Paris, intending to learn winemaking in France. Flint Lloyd had long since settled there and welcomed me to join. The day I left the country, Irma Gardner and Larry Smith held a grand wedding. The bride wore a high-end custom wedding dress, adorned with jewels. I remembered our wedding. We were really poor. The wedding dress was a simple $200 white dress. And the bouquet was a cotton tree flower picked from the roadside. Plain and unadorned like our love at the time. The past gradually fades with the wind, clouds scatter, things change. I boarded the plane, heading towards a new life. My life became more peaceful, and I thought I would have no further ties with Irma Gardner. Unexpectedly, a year later, I returned home to visit the graves and met her again. Irma Gardner was standing in front of my mother's grave, holding a bunch of white chrysanthemums. When she saw me, for a moment, there was a flash of delight. And she called out hoarsely, "Hervey Miles." I asked coldly, "What are you here for?" She stepped closer, answering hurriedly, "I thought I might run into you. After you sold the house and changed your phone number, I couldn't find you." I distanced myself and asked coldly, "What's your business with me?" The mountain breeze whipped up some fine sand. And she probably got some in her eyes as they began to turn red. "Just wanted to talk to you." I felt like I had heard the most absurd joke. "Irma Gardner, you have a husband now. Leave, don't be an eyesore in front of my parents' grave." She remained unfazed, standing her ground, and I couldn't drive her away, so I just ignored her. "I want to explain about the night your mother passed away." Irma Gardner continued speaking, regardless of whether I wanted to listen. She said, "I was planning to leave, but he stopped me, and I accidentally stirred up the fetal gas." I dismissed it with a perfunctory "oh." She hung her head, her tone sorrowful. "Hervey Miles, I had a miscarriage that night." My hand, arranging the offerings, paused slightly, but I still didn't say anything to her. After a long silence, she suddenly asked, "If I had come that night, would you not hate me so much?" I looked up and met her eyes. The sadness there was unmistakable. I didn't understand what point there was to her expression now. I quickly averted my gaze, pretended not to see anything. Burned 3 sticks of incense for my parents, reported my current situation to them, and told them I was doing very well. As I descended the mountain after the memorial, Irma Gardner followed me constantly, talking the whole time. She spoke of the times we watched flowers on the hillside, birds in the forest, clouds in the sky. She remembered everything. But Irma Gardner, the flowers on the hillside no longer bloom. The birds in the forest have flown away, even the clouds in the sky have changed shapes. Everything has changed. The old home was uninhabitable as no one took care of it. So I stayed a night in a hotel in town and flew back to France directly. Reuniting with Irma Gardner didn't stir much in my heart. Coincidentally, Flint Lloyd had established his own clothing brand and became busy. I had employees on the vineyard and was quite idle, so I spent my days in the studio helping him. I jokingly said, "We both study trade, yet now one's a tailor and the other a winemaker. We're really straying from our professions." He wagged his finger. No, life is about gradually discovering yourself. During a chat, I asked him, "When did you start getting interested in fashion design?" He hesitated for a moment, then answered softly, "When you married Irma Gardner." He said there was something I had never known. "Do you remember the outfits you both wore at the wedding? The ones with exquisite patterns but ridiculously cheap prices? You always thought I got a friend to help with that, didn't you?" I nodded. He continued, "Actually, it was Irma Gardner who didn't want to spend money. She only bought the simplest white dress and suit. But not wanting you to feel she was shortchanged, she personally drew the designs, consulted my designer friend, and slowly embroidered the patterns herself. Even the veil was made by her. I never knew she could do needlework. At first, she couldn't, but my friend is particularly skilled and very smart. She learned it in just a few days. She didn't want you to feel guilty, so she didn't let me tell you." He said that back then he was only responsible for assisting. But seeing us dressed up at that moment made him feel a deep sense of accomplishment. Our thoughts drifted back to the past together. He recalled, on the wedding day, when you lifted Irma Gardner's veil. The way she looked at your face, tearfully moved, is something I'll never forget. I felt a mix of emotions and chuckled. At that time, she really did love me a lot. Flint Lloyd thought for a moment and said, "Actually, I ran into Irma Gardner a few days ago." I wasn't very affected and calmly replied, "Paris is the city of art. She's a painter, it's normal for her to be here." He shook his head, "I think she's here to find you. That night, when you left something at my place and I went to chase after you, I happened to see her following you from a distance, watching you, but not coming forward." I joked, "I remember you're nightblind. You probably mistook someone else." Flint Lloyd angrily retorted, "Do you think I'm blind?" I even chatted with her for a bit. "Bro, I specifically told her about how you came to Paris earlier to find Mr. Johnson. We can't do good deeds without leaving our names behind." Remembering this, I gave him a thumbs up. Flint Lloyd sighed. After hearing that, she was completely stunned, looking heartbroken, quite pitiable. I paused and said, "That has nothing to do with me anymore. A very capable young woman arrived at my estate and took great care of my grapes. Thanks to her, the newly made wine was of high quality, and I got a big order. Unexpectedly, at the client's banquet, which invited many renowned figures in the art world, Irma Gardner was among them. When I went to deliver the wine, I ran into her and Larry Smith. Their state was strange, they spoke little, not like newlyweds. I didn't stay long, I signed the order and left. When Irma Gardner saw me, she followed, and Larry Smith didn't react much. I walked quickly, and Irma Gardner jogged up and grabbed my hand. The moment our skins touched, she quickly let go. "I'm sorry." "Irma Gardner, what do you want?" "Hervey Miles, I." She hesitated, and I lost my patience. As if suddenly thinking of something, her previously dull eyes became bright. "I want to paint a landscape of France. Can you be my guide?" Afraid I'd refuse, she added, "You can name your price." I replied, "I don't need money." She seemed devastated, her tone almost pleading. "Hervey Miles, can you give me a chance to make amends?" I looked at her coldly. "Amend for what?" "I already know about Mr. Johnson." I calmly said, "You got chosen because of your own talent. I took your money too, we owe each other nothing." Irma Gardner lowered her head, murmuring softly, "Why didn't you tell me back then?" I laughed. What difference would it have made? The sadness in her eyes was very apparent. She stubbornly said, "Maybe we wouldn't have ended up like this. I found it ironic, Irma Gardner, wake up. We were together for so many years. Do you think this is the only foolish thing I've done for you? Your heart was already gone. Anything I said or did was in vain. Besides, I don't need your temporary gratitude. Maybe I had once envisioned such a scene. The unfaithful person suddenly awakening with deep regret. But when it truly happened, it didn't feel satisfying. How did that stunningly beautiful girl become like this? I paused and seriously said, Irma Gardner, don't make excuses for yourself, or I will look down on you. She became rigid, her face full of pain. Walk the path you chose well. After saying that, I no longer looked at her and walked away without turning back. That night, Flint Lloyd worked overtime and asked me to bring him a late-night snack. It was already dark, his studio was in a secluded area. And 2 streetlights on the path were broken, making the whole alley dark and silent. Suddenly, 2 men with knives jumped out from the roadside and robbed me of all my belongings. I didn't have much money on me. After rummaging through my bag, they harshly said something to me in poorly pronounced French that I couldn't quite understand before punching me. We started to wrestle. In the chaos, a figure quickly rushed over and hit one of the attackers on the head with a stone. The knife-wielding attacker viciously stabbed the person twice in return before fleeing in a panic. It all happened too fast. When I came to my senses, I saw Irma Gardner lying on the ground, covered in blood. I took her to the hospital. The doctor said she had been stabbed in the abdomen, luckily not hitting any vital organs. However, her right hand, used to block the knife, had its tendon severed. She might never be able to paint again. She lay on the hospital bed, her face somewhat pale. The first thing she did upon seeing me was to ask if I was hurt. I shook my head, my brow furrowing deeper. She smiled and tried to comfort me, "Don't worry, it's not serious." I hesitated for a long time but ultimately told her the truth. Irma Gardner's smile froze for a moment, then she forced herself to look relieved. "It's fine, as long as you're okay." But she wasn't a good actress. She turned her face away, trembling all over. I tried to reassure her, the doctors didn't say there's no hope. Even if your right hand can't do it, you can still try with your left hand. There will always be a way. She suddenly turned around, her eyes red. "Hervey, if I divorce Larry, I cut her off, speaking bluntly, "Irma Gardner, there's no more us. Focus on your recovery and don't think about anything else." The despair in Irma Gardner's eyes was evident. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, humbly pleading, "Can you at least stay tonight?" I calmly replied, "The person who can be with you now is Larry, not me." However, Larry didn't show up that night, and in the end, I didn't leave. While Irma Gardner was in surgery, I called Larry using her phone, but there was no answer. I also sent a text, but there was no reply. She developed a slight fever in the middle of the night and vomited blood. The doctor examined her again and said she had stomach cancer. It wasn't at an advanced stage yet and could be cured with active treatment. I didn't understand why she ended up like this when she had money and status. But I didn't ask anything. The next afternoon, Larry came, looking well-dressed and full of energy. Only pestering the doctor about whether Irma Gardner's hand could still paint. Not even noticing I was there. I bid farewell to Irma Gardner, "Take care of yourself. I'm leaving." She said nothing, lying on the hospital bed, her gaze lifeless. After Irma Gardner's right hand was incapacitated and she could no longer paint, the value of her works skyrocketed. The announcement of the auction of her work Muse quickly sparked a heated discussion. Back when Irma Gardner was showcasing her love through painting, she soon married the man depicted in her artwork. And it became a widely talked about romantic story online. This painting, because of the romantic love story behind it, became even more valuable, and was eventually bought by a collector for $50 million. But just a few days later, an unexpected development occurred. #Larry sells fake paintings #. #Irma Gardner cheating in marriage #. Both hashtags trended simultaneously. Irma Gardner held a press conference, publicly stating that the original Muse had long been destroyed and that the one sold was a forgery by Larry. She admitted on camera that the romantic story behind Muse was actually an ugly affair. And she had abandoned her husband of 10 years after achieving success. Netizens were in an uproar, condemning both the woman and the man. Due to Irma Gardner's report, the police launched an investigation into the sale of fake paintings. Soon after, Larry was arrested on charges of producing and selling counterfeit goods. And due to the large amount involved, he faced a life sentence. From then on, there was no more news about Irma Gardner. My life became peaceful and tranquil, like grass growing on embankments and leaves on treetops. The winery's business flourished, and 6 months later, I met an unusual guest, a 16-year-old French girl who came to buy wine every few days, always asking specifically for wine I brewed, and she had a mysterious request. She wanted me to teach her Chinese, one sentence at a time, and she would carefully record my words with a voice recorder. Sometimes it was simple greetings like good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And sometimes it was something else. On Valentine's Day, she came again to buy wine and asked me to teach her how to say I love you. By then, I had started a new relationship with the woman who had been taking good care of my vineyard. I recorded I love you as the guest requested, and she suddenly leaned in and added, I love you too. I lovingly patted her head and turned to apologize to the girl. I added an extra sentence, hope that's okay. The girl bit her lip, looking conflicted, but in the end, she said nothing and left with the wine. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. The other side was silent for a long time. I assumed it was a wrong number and hung up as my girlfriend called me for dinner. After that, the girl never came to my vineyard again. Irma Gardner's name resurfaced in the public eye shortly after Valentine's Day. I stared at the trending hashtag Irma Gardner last work hashtag for a long time. The news reported that her body was found in an old farmhouse in France. She died with illnesses, destitute. Her only keepsake was a painting titled True Love, depicting a couple in wedding attire. The bride wore a white dress and held a bouquet of kapok, and the groom gently embraced her. Their faces were obscured by veils, indistinct and unclear. Experts hailed it as Irma Gardner's best work ever. Netizens were more curious whether the artist was reminiscing about a past love or had found a new soulmate. I looked at the bouquet in the bride's hand, and memories drifted back. The year I married Irma Gardner, the kapok flowers bloomed exceptionally early. I brought some back and tied them into a bouquet with ribbon. She asked me, why not roses? I smiled mysteriously and said, because I love the flower language of kapok.